Winter settled heavily over the village of Windale, pressing frost against every roof and doorway. Yet silence carried a tension no villager could comfortably explain. Young Thomas, the village scribe, sensed something unusual. The air felt heavier tonight, as though unseen eyes observed from the tree line beyond the frozen fields. By early evening, the first strange sign appeared, swirling frost patterns forming on doors and windows, shaped like delicate spirals no winter wind could naturally make. Villagers whispered nervously. Old men spoke of a winter long ago when similar signs foretold something ancient rising from the deep northern woods. Thomas documented each frost pattern carefully, sketching them into his worn journal. Yet the more he copied, the more the symbols appeared strangely familiar. That night, Windale's animals grew restless. Dogs barked toward the woods while horses refused their stalls, snorting nervously as if sensing an invisible presence. The village priest, Father Aldrich, recalled ancient tales. "When the frost spirals return," he warned, "the winter spirit walks again." His voice trembled slightly. At sunrise, a second sign appeared. Strange footprints, too large for any man, pressed deeply into the snow, leading from the forest toward the well. The prints ended abruptly at the well's edge, no signs of weight turning back, as though something had simply vanished into thin winter air. Thomas sketched the tracks carefully, the claws extended far too long, curling like hooked branches, reminding him of illustrations from forgotten winter legends. By noon, a chilling howl echoed across Windale. Not wolf, not wind, something older, layered with sorrow and distant memory. Elders spoke reluctantly of the winter spirit, a guardian once revered, now angered after generations abandoned the old rites that honored its presence. Thomas wondered if the frost spirals were messages rather than warnings. Each appeared more deliberate, almost crafted with intention rather than cold coincidence. Livestock began disappearing overnight, no tracks leading away, only faint frost spirals left behind in the snow where the animals once rested. Father Aldrich urged the villagers to gather inside the chapel. "The spirit tests us," he insisted. "We must remember the old vows before more vanish." Inside, Thomas studied a faded mural depicting a towering figure draped in white furs, the winter spirit painted centuries earlier in reverent detail. The mural's eyes held an almost knowing sharpness. Thomas shivered, not from cold, but from the unsettling sense the painted gaze followed his movement. A sudden gust burst through the chapel, extinguishing several candles at once. Frost spirals began forming across the stone floor in curling, deliberate lines. Father Aldrich whispered, "It is calling to us." Thomas knelt beside the spirals, noticing they formed a path leading toward the chapel's rear chamber. The rear chamber door creaked open by itself, revealing a dim, narrow hall lined with frost-touched stones. Thomas felt compelled to follow. Inside, Thomas found an ancient scroll sealed with wax bearing the same spiral symbol. Dust coated every surface, untouched for generations until now. Breaking the seal, he unrolled the scroll. It described a ritual once performed each winter solstice to honor the spirit and keep darkness balanced. The scroll warned that if the ritual was forgotten, the spirit would return not as guardian but judge, weighing the village's memory against ancient winter law. Thomas hurried back to the chapel hall. Father Aldrich's face paled as he read the warning. "We have broken the old pact," he whispered. Outside, the wind rose sharply. Snow spiraled in unnatural patterns, twisting like living threads across rooftops before scattering toward the forest edge. Children cried as livestock vanished again. Only a single frost spiral remained each time, marked with an unfamiliar symbol inside its curling design. Thomas compared the symbols to those in his journal. A chilling realization formed. They were evolving, becoming more deliberate, almost like a language seeking to be understood. As night fell, villagers heard faint musical tones drifting from the forest, thin, distant chimes carried by a wind too soft to form them naturally. Father Aldrich insisted everyone remain inside, yet Thomas stepped toward the sound, compelled by a sense the spirit was guiding him rather than threatening harm. Halfway to the forest, the chimes stopped abruptly. In their place, whispering winds circled Thomas, forming tiny frost spirals at his feet. A soft voice seemed to rise from the spirals, distant yet near. Thomas couldn't decipher the words, but he felt unmistakable urgency beneath the quiet plea. The spirals shifted, forming an arrow-like pattern pointing back toward the chapel. Whatever presence guided them clearly wanted Thomas to return inside quickly. As he re-entered the chapel, Every candle flared brighter simultaneously. The mural of the winter spirit seemed to shimmer as if awakening beneath renewed attention. Villagers gasped as frost spirals formed across the mural's lower stones. Thomas realized the spirit was communicating through symbols, urging the village to prepare. Then came the last sign. A branch coated in shimmering ice appeared inside the chapel, resting gently atop the altar, untouched by human hands. Father Aldrich stepped forward cautiously. "No one brought this," he murmured. "This is the spirit's offering, or its warning." The branch glowed faintly beneath the altar's candles. Thomas reached toward the branch, hesitating. The ice shimmered with shifting shades, almost pulsing like something alive beneath a thin layer of frozen crystal. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, a cold rush surged through him, yet not painful. Instead, it carried visions of forests covered in endless winter. He staggered back, breath sharp. In the vision, the winter spirit stood tall, draped in furs, watching the village with unreadable, ancient judgment. Thomas trembled. The spirit's gaze held neither cruelty nor warmth, only expectation, as though assessing Windale's forgotten promises. "The spirit is waiting," Thomas whispered, "for us to remember something we neglected, something important." His voice echoed against the chapel's frost-touched walls. Father Aldrich nodded slowly. "The winter vows," he said. "Our ancestors honored them each solstice. We abandoned them generations ago." Thomas unrolled the scroll again. Symbols within matched the frost spirals appearing throughout the village, forming a ritual pattern forgotten by time. Outside, the wind intensified, hammering against the chapel door. Snow blew sideways, forming unnatural waves rolling across the village square. Thomas realized each sign had been a step, guiding Windale toward remembering the ritual. The spirit wasn't punishing, it was urging them to restore balance. But the scroll warned the final sign, an intrusion of winter inside sacred space, meant time was nearly gone. The village had hours, perhaps less. The icy branch atop the altar grew brighter. Thin wisps of frost curled upward, forming slow, spiraling motions like breath rising from sleeping lungs. "The spirit is inside," Thomas whispered, "watching, waiting, judging." His words chilled the villagers more than the winter wind ever could. A deep groan echoed through the chapel beams. Frost crawled higher along the walls, climbing like vines toward the vaulted ceiling. The candles dimmed again, their flames shrinking under an unseen breath. The mural's eyes gleamed faintly, as though the spirit listened directly. Thomas sensed the spirit wanted one thing: acknowledgement. Its centuries of guardianship forgotten, its offerings ignored, its warnings dismissed as superstition. Father Aldrich opened the ritual book, voice steady. "We must restore the ceremony before the solstice ends, or Windale will not survive winter's judgment." The storm outside roared, shaking the chapel doors violently. Snow crashed against them like waves battering a ship lost at sea. Thomas felt the spirit's presence intensify, the air thickening with cold. Yet beneath the frost he sensed longing, an ancient desire to be remembered. A sudden crack echoed across the chapel. The altar's surface froze solid in seconds, patterns spreading like crystalline lightning. The icy branch split, revealing a glowing spiral carved into its core, matching the scroll's final ritual diagram. "It's showing us the final step," Thomas said. "The ritual isn't just remembered, it must be performed, exactly as once done." Before anyone could act, the mural's painted eyes flared with piercing light. A deep presence filled the chapel, heavy as midwinter night. Thomas froze as an unseen voice touched his mind, a whisper, ancient and cold. "Remember the vow." He staggered, gripping a pew for balance. The spirit was speaking, directly, unmistakably. Thomas alone seemed able to hear it clearly, chosen as the village's bridge to their forgotten guardian. Father Aldrich steadied Thomas. "Tell us what it wants." Thomas exhaled shakily. "It wants us to finish what our ancestors began." Through the fading whisper, Thomas saw a vision of a solstice ritual, offerings of evergreen firelight and spoken remembrance honoring winter's ancient guardian. The chapel doors heaved under the storm's force. Snow blasted through cracks, swirling in patterns identical to the spirit's spirals. Thomas lifted the glowing branch. As he did, the frost spirals across the floor aligned toward him, forming a perfect ritual circle. Gasps echoed through the chapel. The spirit wasn't attacking. It was preparing them, shaping the space for the ancient ceremony to begin again. Thomas felt the spirit's voice again. Begin! The word resonated inside him like distant thunder muffled by centuries of snow. The villagers formed a hesitant circle. Father Aldrich raised the scroll. "We restore the vow," he declared, voice trembling but resolute. Thomas placed the glowing branch at the circle's center. Frost spirals gathered around it, spinning like tiny galaxies forming in winter air. The ritual began. Ancient words spoken softly echoed from the scroll. The spirit stirred, its presence intensifying until even the air felt weighted. Suddenly the candles extinguished. Darkness swallowed the chapel. Only the frost spirals glowed beneath Thomas's feet, just before a voice whispered, "The trial begins."